Saul Lieberman, also known as Rabbi Shaul Lieberman or, among some of his students, the Grash, was an Israeli rabbi and a scholar of Talmud. He served as Professor of Talmud at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America for over 40 years, and for many years was Dean of the Harry Fischel Institute in Israel and also President of the American Academy for Jewish Research. Biography. Born in Motul, near Pinsk, Russian Empire, he studied at the Orthodox Yeshivot of Malchin Slobodka. While studying at the Slobodka Yeshiva, he befriended rabbis Yitzchak Ruderman and Yitzchak Hodner, both of whom would become leaders of great rabbinical seminaries in America. In the 1920s he attended the University of Kiev, and, following a short stay in Palestine, continued his studies in France. In 1928, he settled in Jerusalem. He studied Talmudic philology and Greek language and literature at the Hebrew University, where he was appointed lecturer in Talmud in 1931. He also taught at the Mizrachi Teachers Seminary and from 1935 was Dean of the Harry Fischel Institute for Talmudic Research in Jerusalem. In 1940, he was invited both by Rabbi Yitzchak Hodner to teach in the Orthodox Yeshiva in Berlin, and by the JTSA to serve as Professor of Palestinian Literature and Institutions. Lieberman chose the offer by the JTSA. Lieberman's decision was motivated by a desire to train American Jews to make a commitment to study and observe the Itzuvit. Quote, in Chaim Dalfin's Conversations with the Rebbe, pp. 54-63, Professor Chaim Dmitrovsky relates that when he was newly hired at JTSA, he asked Rabbi Menahem Mendel Schneerson of Lubavitch whether he should remain in the seminary, and the response was, as long as Lieberman is there. Quote, in 1949 he was appointed dean, and in 1958 rector, of the Seminary's Rabbinical School. Lieberman died on March 23, 1983 while flying to Jerusalem for Passover. Awards and honors. In 1957, Lieberman was awarded the Bialik Prize for Jewish Thought. In 1971, he was awarded the Israel Prize for Jewish Studies. In 1976, he received the Harvey Prize of the Haifa Technion. He was an honorary member of the Academy of the Hebrew Language, a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and a Fellow of the Israel Academy of Sciences and Humanities. Paradox in affiliation. Perhaps because he was so deeply involved in the seminary, Lieberman was often accused of being on the very right wing of conservative Judaism. Personally fully observant of halacha, he would not pray in a synagogue which did not have separate seating for men and women. Lieberman insisted that all services at the seminary's Stein Hall, where he prayed daily, have a mechitza, even though the great majority of conservative synagogues did not. Additionally, Lieberman saw to it that the seminary synagogue in which he prayed used an Orthodox prayer book, rather than Siddurim produced by the Rabbinical Assembly. He also frowned upon egalitarian participation by women in the seminary synagogue services, even though the conservative movement at large was moving towards that goal. Towards the end of his life, he was very upset over his life work in trying to ensure that the conservative movement was a halachic movement. He was very distraught at the direction the conservative movement was taking in deliberating about ordaining women as rabbis. Immediately after his death, at the direction of JTS's Chancellor Gerson Cohen and with the approval of the JTS faculty, the conservative movement decided to admit women into its rabbinical school at JTS. He saw it as a major split with normative halakhic Judaism and very much opposed to Jewish law. Some of his students, representing major figures of the Talmud department of the Jewish Theological Seminary and whom broke away from the conservative movement, have published and translated his Teshuvah against the ordination of women in Tomei Kahaka work. In 1929 Lieberman published Al-Ha Yerushalmi, in which he suggested ways of amending corruptions in the text of the Jerusalem Talmud and offered variant readings to the text of the Tractate of Sota. This was followed by a series of text studies of the Jerusalem Talmud, which appeared in Tabiz by Talmud Shelkais area, in which he expressed the view that the first three tractates of the order Nezikin in the Jerusalem Talmud had been compiled in Caesarea about the middle of the 4th century CE, and by Ha Yerushalmi Kifei a commentary on the treatises Shabbat, Eruvin, and Pesachim of the Jerusalem Talmud. His preoccupation with the Jerusalem Talmud impressed him with the necessity of clarifying the text of the Tannaitic sources, especially that of the Tosefta, on which no commentaries had been composed by the earlier authorities and to whose elucidation only few scholars had devoted themselves in later generations. He published the 4-volume Tosefta Rishonim, a commentary on the entire Tosefta with textual corrections based on manuscripts, early printings, and quotations found in early authorities. He also published Tashlam Tosefta, an introductory chapter to the second edition of M.S. Zuckermandel's Tosefta edition, dealing with quotations from the Tosefta by early authorities that are not found in the text. Years later, Lieberman returned to the systematic elucidation of the Tosefta. He undertook the publication of the Tosefta text, based on manuscripts and accompanied by brief explanatory notes, and of an extensive commentary called Tosefta Kief Shutar. The latter combined philological research and historical observations with a discussion of the entire Talmudic and rabbinic literature in which the relevant Tosefta text is either commented upon or quoted. Between 1955 and 1973, 10 volumes of the new edition were published representing the text and the commentaries on the entire orders of Zeraim, Mod and Nashim. Furthermore, in 1988, 3 volumes were published posthumously on the order of Nezikin, including tractates Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, and Bava Basra. The entire set was republished in the 1990s in 13 volumes, and again in 2001 in 12 volumes. In Sifrei Zuta, Lieberman advanced the view that this halakhic midrash was in all likelihood finally edited by Bar Kapara in Lida. Other books of his were Shekian, on Jewish legends, customs, and literary sources found in Karaite and Christian polemical writings, and Midrashai Taiman, wherein he showed that the Yemenite Midrashim had preserved exegetical material which had been deliberately omitted by the rabbis. He edited a variant version of Midrash Debarim Rabbah. In his view, that version had been current among Sephardi Jewry, while the standard text had been that of Ashkenazi Jewry. In 1947 he published Hilkot HaYerushalmi, which he identified as a fragment of a work by Maimonides on the Jerusalem Talmud in a similar vein as the Rif is to the Babylonian Talmud. Lieberman also edited the hitherto unpublished Tosefta commentary Hasai David by David Pardo on the Order Tehoro. The first part of this work appeared in 1970. His 2 English volumes, Greek in Jewish Palestine and Hellenism in Jewish Palestine, which also appeared in a Hebrew translation, illustrate the influence of Hellenistic culture on Jewish Palestine in the 1st century CE. A number of his works have appeared in new and revised editions. Lieberman served as editor-in-chief of a new critical edition of Maimonides' Mishnah Torah, and as an editor of the Judaica series of Yale University, where he worked closely with Herbert Danby, the Anglican scholar of the Mishnah. He also edited several scholarly miscellanies. He contributed numerous studies to scholarly publications as well as notes to books of fellow scholars. In these he dwelt on various aspects of the world of ideas of the rabbis, shed light on events in the Talmud.He period, and elucidated scores of obscure words and expressions of Talmud.He and Midrashic literature. He also published a heretofore unknown Midrashic work that he painstakingly pieced together by deriving its text from an anti-Jewish polemic written by Ramon Marti, and various published lectures of medieval rabbis. This Midrashic text was lost on account of vigorous church censorship and suppression. Lieberman's work was published while he headed match on Harry Fischel. Jacob Neusner, a leading scholar of the history of Rabbinic Judaism, criticized the bulk of Lieberman's work as idiosyncratic and that it lacked a valid methodology and was prone to other serious shortcomings. However, 10 years earlier, in an article published shortly after his death, Lieberman strongly criticized Neusner's lack of scholarship in the latter's translation of 3 tractates of the Yerushalmi. Meir Bar-Ilan, Lieberman's nephew, accused Neusner of being biased against Lieberman due to a personal issue. Lieberman clause, a solution to the Aguna issue. Marriages. Lieberman was married for several years to the daughter of Liza Rabinovitz, rabbi of Minsk. After her death, he married Judith Berlin, who was a daughter of Orthodox Rabbi Meir Berlin, leader of the Mizrachi movement. Judith Lieberman studied at Hunter College and then at Columbia University under Professor Moses Harders and Professor Mosley. She served from 1941 first as Hebrew principal and then as Dean of Hebrew Studies of Orthodox Shulamith School for Girls in New York, the first Jewish day school for girls in North America. Among her publications were Robert Browning and Hebraism, and an autobiographical chapter which was included in 13 Americans. The Spiritual Autobiographies, edited by Louis Finkelstein. The Liebermans had no children.